All right, so hello everybody. We'll start. So if you're here, please turn on your cameras. Mm. Okay, so all right, so today we're going to continue talking about quantitative research. And we specifically want to talk about the measurement part and how can questions be quantified in order to fit into quantitative research. But before that, this is like a quick announcement. So if you go to Blackboard's under course content, you would see that I uploaded a link for self-enrollment group, self-enroll groups. And so, as you may know, if you've read the syllabus, that there's like a group project component to this course. And so this is the time to start like joining a group, thinking about the group project. So I made like a group set by which you can sign up for whatever group you prefer. So there are like 7 groups. You can basically coordinate with like a group of classmates that you would like to work together and then sign up for one group all at once. Um, so that's there. So hopefully you would find a group that you'd like to join by Friday. Um, so if you have preferences for people you like to work with, you can sign up with them or let me know if you find difficulty signing up or self-enrolling in a group. It should be super easy, by the way. You just click on the group literally and you join. Or if you don't have a preference, but you have like a preference of not to join someone, some people. So, and this is based on previous experience. So if you had like this, like a 1 or 2 individuals you don't like to be in a group with for whatever reason, um, like personal reason, or like you had a bad experience with them or not, let me know. Because by Friday, if you don't have a specific preference, I'm just gonna randomly assign students to whichever spots that are left, right? If I have 2 students in group 3, let's say have 2 empty spots, I'm just gonna assign them to group 3, for example. Um, and so, yeah, this is the part about open role groups. Also, the assignment sheet is uploaded for the group project, which is basically about providing a group or like a research idea or research proposal. I'm going to go over the assignment sheet in detail on Friday, but just like you to know that it's uploaded. So it's preferably you might read it before Friday class so you can come up with questions. But I'm going to go over it if what about then, and of course throughout we can talk about the group projects like in during office hours and whatnot. Do you have questions about joining the group? Okay, good. And so yeah, we're going to talk now about yeah, quantitative research. So I think before I delve into the topic, I'm just going to do like a quick recap of what we learned so far about quantitative research. So we said that quantitative research, the aim of quantitative research, the goal is to be able to measure variables in order to test associations, relationships. So we said quantitative research as opposed to qualitative research. It's mostly concerned with testing hypotheses. So if you're testing hypotheses, you want to build like from mathematical association between the two variables or more that you're studying. So for instance, do we have an association between um, exposure to Zoom and consumption of Zoom content, and then I don't know, having a headache or depression or sense of isolation or cognitive overload, right? So the association between Zoom use and cognitive overload, or the association between consuming Instagram images and motivation to exercise, or the association between playing video games and sense of cooperation. And we said, like you measure it in order to find like association, and those measurements are like need to be consistent, precise, and accurate. And by consistent means they are not based on subjective impressions, like what you feel or what the subjects feel about it. They should be some way, some agreed upon measurement by which we can consistently measure whatever variable we're talking about. And they need to be precise. So that's the quantifiable part, right? So they won't be based also on subjective estimations, but those measurements have to have like attached numbers to them. So we give more precise values. And then we said, but the problem was that the variables in communication and social science in general are not like tangible variables, or they don't have a real presence in the physical world. So when we talk about things like motivation or body image or dissatisfaction or aggressiveness or aggressive thoughts, those are not things that we could physically measure, like temperature or electromagnetic waves, uh, or burning or heat or coldness, those type of things, right? Like as in natural sciences. Those are things we know they exist like like a social construct or like a social psychological feeling or experience, but they are not measured directly. So therefore, we say what takes place in social science and communication research, more particularly, is that we come up with a definition for a construct by which it become a defined concept. Right? So we have a notion about video game enjoyment, but then you have to precisely define what video game enjoyment is. Like a sense of, I think it's like a sense of elevation and engagement with the video game while you're playing it. So that definition is then become what this concept is all about. So whenever someone mentioned that concept, they're referring to that definition, right? Um, but we said also this is just one step, but in order to actually measure it, we need some criteria. So, okay, video game enjoyment, I know what the definition is, or when we talked about parasocial relationship, okay, I know what you mean by that. So, parasocial relationship or ad intrusiveness, for example. We define ad intrusiveness as like the type of ads that disturb or like someone's consumption of media content. But what are the criteria for that? So some of you who worked on the quiz in the Panopto video say so like this ad was disturbing, this ad was invasive, this ad was annoying, uh, this ad like stopped me from continuing to consume the content that I liked. So those four criteria would be are the operational definition. You gave exact, precise descriptions of what that concept you define is all about. And those statements, those descriptions, those criteria would become your operational definition by which you're going to measure the concept whenever you're running a study that involves that concept. Okay? Those definitions, those operational definitions would need to be quantified. So we would measure it, in other words, based on numbers, right? So like 1 to 5, 1 to 100, 1 to 10, etc., etc. And that's what we call standardization. So whenever we are measuring, for instance, parasocial relationship, we have statements, and those statements have numbers at like numerical values attached to them, by which we could measure the level of having that variable, for example, right? That's what we call standardization. It's like when you assign precise numbers to the operational definition statements. And those statements, we say, like ought to be exhaustive and coherent. So they make sense that they coming together, and they also cover all the aspect of the variable you're testing, and not only, but just a small aspect of it. That's something we're going to talk later about in the semester. So to remind you of the step we showed like a slide before, like you start with like a vague notion about something, then they come up with like a theoretical conception or like what we call conceptual definition. And then their conceptual definition will have statements that are aimed to translate that conceptual definition into measurable items or like measurable criteria. And then when you attach numerical values to those criteria, you're doing the measurement part or like the quantification part, right? So that's what we learned last week. Um, so in communication, so in quantitative research in communication, uh, we covering three methods. So one was quantitative content analysis, which we already covered, right? In which that's a type of content analysis in which you basically want to know like the volume of the appearance of like some sentences, some constructs, some objects within a body of text. Like so how many times the word danger or the word COVID appeared or like on a like I don't know a piece in a newspaper or something, right? So that's quantitative. You're just counting the volume or the percentage of something. But then we have survey research and experiments, which we're going to cover like for the remainder of this semester, right? And those two things, like survey research and experiments, are questionnaire-based methods for the most part, right? So they are methods by which you have questionnaires research participants respond to or answer, and then you analyze their responses. Uh, can someone tell me what? Do you know what questionnaire is? Someone telling me what a questionnaire is? You hear the word questionnaire. What does questionnaire mean?
It's just like a standardized list of questions that measure like people's feelings or certain demographics or things like.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, so it's yeah when it's basically a list of questions that are standardized. And so yes, so it would be like close-ended questions, and they are standardized by which there's like some specific option and some numerical values to those options. So that's like, and those lists of questions will be your questionnaire. Okay. Each question in a questionnaire is called an item. Okay. So when you say questionnaire with different items, item means a question. And those items like must measure something. So one item could measure one thing, or a group of items could measure one thing or one variable, right? So if I ask you what school you go to or what university you're enrolled in, that's one item asking about one variable, which is university, right? If I ask you like what's your age, that's also like one item, one variable. But also we can have a group of items measuring one variable. So if we're measuring, for instance, motivation to exercise, right? And then can have 4 or 5 different items, all meant to capture that concept we're calling motivation to exercise. Okay, so it could be, and I'm making this up, like I feel motivated to exercise even when I'm tired, or like my day cannot pass without doing a physical activity, or um, uh, exercising makes me feel better. So that's like motivation to exercise. We're covering could cover different emotional and cognitive aspects, but all of the items are meant to measure that one thing, all right, which we're calling motivation to exercise. Those group of items that are meant to measure one variable, we call that a scale. That's just in research method language. Scale doesn't mean a physical scale, but a scale means that, like a list of questions that are meant to capture exhaustively and consistently a specific variable or a specific concept. So, like motivation would have a scale, enjoyment would have a scale, um, different attitudes, so attitudes toward school, or attitudes toward gender equality, or attitudes toward each variable that exists in communication research and social science research ought to have a scale. Sometimes they have different scales in which people disagree which one is better. Sometimes there's one established scale, right? But at least every scale that is presented is standardized. So the same list of question, same numbers, so they can be used in different studies and replicated. Right? So they're not based on my impression or like the subjective experience as we've seen in qualitative research, but those scales are aimed to quantify the variables or items or concept that you're measuring. Okay. Though that level of that quantification can vary in terms of how level, like different levels it can have, or like what it can indicate. So we have different types of scales in measurements, and that's the quantification part, right? Uh, some people say like you can count them as 3 or 4 or just two, so it depends. But basically, most mainly we have 3 scales. We have nominal scales, we have ordinal scales, and we have continuous scales. Okay, and continuous could be further divided into like two different types. So we can talk later. But like, let's start with nominal. So forget about like scales and whatnot. Can anyone tell me what the word nominal means? What does nominal mean to you? Let's see. Let's see who's here. Yes, Eric.
Doesn't nominal mean just like in name only?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. In name only. So a nominal scale, it means a scale in which the numbers don't have actual values, but they're just in name only. And they're used just like a matter of convention or convenience. So for example, when you get a survey and they ask you to pick your gender, and then you click 1 for male and click 2 for female and maybe 3 for other, that doesn't mean male are ahead of females, like males are better than females. Put that 1 female is equal to 1 male because the female is 2 and the male is 1. No, these are just nominal categories. The differences are nominal, and we have numbers just as a matter of convenience, right? Or like when you press one for English and two for Spanish, one or two could be swapped, would have no difference whatsoever. So it doesn't indicate anything about the values or the categories you're selecting, right? And so yeah, nominal scales in name only could be binary, could be multiple, but there's no there's no like value to the numbers or like real mathematical values to the numbers. On the other hand, ordinal, there are levels that are in order, hence ordinal. So they are categories that are ranked, but they are not basically, the distances between them are not actually numerical, or they don't have equal mathematical distances between the different categories. And let me give you an example. So, as a matter of fact, let's ask someone. So let's say let's say in a race. Um, so actually, let me ask a question. Grace, are you here? Are you still here?
Yes.
Okay. So a question for you. So suppose so we have three different teams that are competing, right? In a group or a conference. So like let's say Team Grace came in first, Team Eric came in second, and Team Olivia came in third. Okay.
Okay.
From that statement, do you know the difference in points between Team Grace and Team Eric?
No, unless maybe you're calibrating like the scores of the games or whatever we're talking about.
Yeah, okay. Do you know, okay, so in terms of scores in games, do you know if the difference between Eric and Team Grace is similar to the distance between Team Eric and Team Olivia?
You could compare the scores.
If we have them, right?
If you have them, yes. But if you
Yeah.
don't have them, then no, not really.
But you cannot know from the ranked order.
Yeah.
Okay. So the ranked order is what we call ordinal. So yeah, like you're looking into like a table of, let's say, yeah, the whatever league of like, I don't know, the women volleyball team. And so like there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the distance between number 2 and number 3 could be way, way greater than the difference between 2 and 1. The difference between 2 and 1 could be just like 2 games. The difference between 2 and 3 could be like four games, right? So these are ranked, but they're not mathematically, the numbers are not mathematically ordered like in a real numerical scale, right? So the distance between 1 and 3 doesn't, it's not necessarily 2, right? Like it could be like the difference is wider than the difference between 3 and 4, right? So the difference between 2 and 3 could be wider than the difference between 3 and 4, vice versa. Okay. So those like, yeah, thank you. So those are like things like ranks in a race, college year, because you don't know the difference between like sophomore and junior unless we count the credit number, right? So you could be like only one credit away from becoming a senior, and another student could be 6 credits away from becoming a senior, but both of you are still ranked as junior, right? Economic class, that's another example, right? So there's no necessarily equal distance between lower middle class and middle to middle class, and then from middle class to upper middle class. So that's like if you took economic class. Stages of cancer, like God forbid, it's like different stages, but the distances are not the same. On the other hand, So, and we sort of already covered this a little bit. Continuous that are levels that are ranked, so they share that with ordinal, and they have calculable and equal distance from each level to the next, right? So grades, for instance, I scored like 100 in an exam, and Annie scored 98. Annie is 2 points behind me, like 198. Those are actual calculable differences. Like, so we are she's like 2 points ahead from me. Those are not just arbitrary numbers for ranking. Those are real numbers, real values, right? Um, like in a match of basketball match scores, right? So like one team got 112, the other team got like 100 and like 108. Difference is 4 real points, right? Salaries, weight, height, age, right? And like, yeah, like 20 years old is twice as old as a 10 years old, right? So those are called continuous scales, because continuous means, yeah, like you move from one level to the next in equal distances continuously, right? And hence you could measure even decimals, right? 1.5, 3.5, etc., which are not available in ordinal scales, right? And so, yeah, this is like an example for nominal scale. What's the mobile app that you use the most during the day? And because these are just based on personal preferences, when you put 1 in Uber and like 3 for Snapchat and 4 for Instagram, that doesn't mean like the question is preferring one option over the other, or they are ranked in terms of popularity. This is just an arbitrary ranking. So just make it easier to pick one or pick two so we can make comparison. So these are in name only. It's not, doesn't indicate anything about the popularity or ranking or usefulness of these apps. An example of an ordinal scale, this is one. If you would order chicken wings, what is the spiciness level that you prefer? So mild, medium, hot, extra hot, extremely hot. Why would we consider this an ordinal scale? Why is it ordinal?
You can't really quantify how far apart they are, like how far apart mild and medium are.
Yeah. So in other words, I don't know, for example, if the difference between mild and medium is similar to the distance between medium and hot. Okay, so mild could be just like nothing. Medium could be and hot, then they take it up like really like a significant level. And then extra hot could be just a little bit extra hot. And then extremely hot, they could just double the spiciness. So we cannot tell the difference between like when they jump from one level to the next, right? So in other words, why is this important? Medium is not necessarily in the midpoint between mild and hot. It could be closer to mild, it could be closer to hot, it could be somewhere exactly in between, but we don't know, right? Do you know, there is, however, and this has nothing to do with communication, there is a numerical scale to measure spiciness. You know that one? Or
Ooh,
hot?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's like for like
it's
the ghost pepper and stuff. I know what you're talking
yeah,
about,
yeah,
but I can't remember.
yeah. It's the Scoville, Scoville scale. So that one actually is actually numerical. So they would go from, I think the highest like 30,000 something, right? So the spiciness level that it gives. So let's say your sauce got like 1,000. So that's, yeah, and then like 1,500. That's actually like 50% more than the one at 1,000. Right? Yeah, you see it on like ghost pepper or like habanero, this type of things. Like give you the Scoville level. Here's a continuous scale. So how concerned are you about catching COVID-19 virus on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 being not worried at all, and 5 being very worried, right? Why discontinuous, though? Why do you think this is continuous and not ordinal? Um, Anais, would you guess why this is considered continuous?
Probably because it's like a scale, so it's not really ranked like ordinal would be, but it's more of like a continuous scale.
Yeah. So to ask you a question, in this scale, what is the midpoint?
Yeah, we don't really know the midpoint. Like maybe a 3.
No,
like
from 1 to 5, what's the midpoint?
3, yeah.
Yeah. So the midpoint is 3. So in this scale, 3 is exactly in the middle between 1 and 5, right? Regardless of how you place it, like where you place yourself, 3 or 4, right? But in this scale, we can have an actual midpoint. So when you say 3, that means you don't have like the highest level of worriness or the lowest level of worriness. You're exactly in between. So the distance between 3 and 4 is equals to the distance between 4 and 5, and the distance between 3 and 2 is equal to the distance between 2 and 1, right? Even if it's estimated, obviously, by the person who's answering, right? So if you have an actual midpoint and you can measure distances, then it's continuous, yeah, right? Those those 3 categories, like so nominal, ordinal, and numerical. So nominal and ordinal can both sometimes called categorical, and you don't have to memorize this, but sometimes when you're reading research and you could encounter that phrase, so like it was a categorical variable, and what they mean that it was not a numerical, and I think that's what Anais was saying. It's not like a numerical scale. So it's not like you can measure, like you cannot have decibels, or like cannot have a real midpoint. It's just a way. Categorical means you just categorize different levels. It could be in an order, and that would be ordinal. They could be in no order, that would be nominal. But they don't have actual numerical values, right? That could be measured like in precise mathematical differences. That's what they mean by categorical, like categorical variables. And continuous variables are called numerical as well, because you can have like not only ascending or descending order, but you can also make mathematical like divisions or equations. So 2 is in the middle between 1 and 3, and 4 is double the amount of 2. So you can make mathematical comparisons between different levels. That's the idea, right? Continuous scales, on the other hand, can be further divided into intervals. And those are basically, so intervals are like those basically concepts that were transformed to have standardized difference, right? So if you have a scale to measure depression level, motivation, or intention, right? For that matter, the Fahrenheit scale, they have a set of like or a number of options, right? So I present you with a list of questions, and they have, as we've seen, like options from like 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 or 1 to 11. You pick your choice, right? So they have discrete number of options with equal distance, but no real zero, all right? And so by real zero means the absolute absence of something, right? So even in the previous question, when you say like what level of motivation you have, if you pick no motivation at all, doesn't really mean like zero motivation. Well, I have like I experienced zero enjoyment. Doesn't really mean zero enjoyment. So two individuals could answer like yeah, like 1, but they could be slightly different. So the zero doesn't necessarily mean actual zero. It just means the lowest point in that scale. All right. So that's what we mean. So those zeros, even if you place a zero on those scales, are arbitrary zero. They're not real zeros. On the other hand, ratio scale, it's values that have a true zero. And the true zero means like the absolute absence of the measured variable. With example, things will become clear. So things like income. Can you have zero income? The answer is yes. You can have zero income. Height, theoretically speaking, you can have zero height, which means your non-existence. Like, yeah, if you demolish something and took care of it, it, it went to have zero height or zero weight. Age, if you're still unborn or about to be born, like technically you're still zero until the first second in your life. On the Kelvin scale for temperature, that's the one that we would call that ratio. Do you know, has anyone heard about the Kelvin scale or the absolute zero in temperature? Anyone?
I heard about it in high school, but I haven't really thought about it since then.
What do you remember about it, Emily?
I remember that like that zero is different from the zero in Fahrenheit and Celsius and is like maybe hypothetically like the coldest something can be, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, yes. So that's the coldest something could be, right? So there is something called the Kelvin actually with a K, sorry. That's an autocorrect. It's a Kelvin with a K. And it's basically a scale in which the zero is the absolute absence of any heat or any warmth whatsoever. So that's the coldest something can get. Do you know what's the item that can get the coldest? Which element? This is just a trivia question to feel best. If you ever got asked that in a trivia, so mercury, basically, yeah, the element that could withstand the lowest temperature in nature, and when mercury freezes, that's the absolute zero. So there's no minus in the Kelvin scale. There's no minus values. But zero is an actual zero. There's no heat whatsoever. On the other hand, we know, like, let's say in Celsius, what happens at 0 Celsius?
Water freezes.
Water freezes, right? But other things don't freeze at zero, right? Like oil, for example, or gas, or like gasoline does not freeze at zero, right? We don't freeze at zero. We feel very cold, but we don't freeze at zero. Um, so that zero for Celsius doesn't mean heat or warmth disappeared. Just it was conveniently put at that to measure when water freezes, and at 100 when water boils, right? And for countries that use the metric system, they just like to have that. like a 0 to 100. It's more convenient. But that 0 is totally arbitrary. Like someone placed it on like, okay, when the water freezes, let's call that a 0, and then we go up and we go down. But someone else could came up with a different scale and put the 0 somewhere else, which happened. Hence, we have the Fahrenheit, in which 0 is put at like 32 degrees below the Celsius 0. And anyone could put the 0 in whatever they like. You can come up with a temperature scale and you place the 0 for whatever you find coldest, but then you consistently go up or down. And that will be an accurate scale, be a legitimate scale. Okay. So, yeah. So that's basically it. We're going to have an exercise that I'm going to upload a video for. Do you have any questions? Okay, so you should just wait for the exercise and we can clear it before Friday. And I hope to see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.